Hello everyone, and though I might be just a wee bit late with this, Happy New Year. I suppose we've all felt the same about the beginning of 2021. It must surely be better than 2020. We live in hope, and hope is what I had in mind when I prepared this programme. Is there a symphony which speaks to me of hope? Well, there is. It's Ralph Vaughan Williams' Fifth Symphony, a piece completed and premiered in wartime, but it's anything but warlike. Compare it to another great wartime symphony, Shostakovich's Leningrad. It's a magnificent work of defiance and victory. I think Vaughan Williams' Fifth Symphony is magnificent too, but it's music of peace and hope. So what can I tell you about Vaughan Williams' Fifth Symphony? Which I think is the summit of his symphonic achievements, although others may differ. The first thing I'd like to say is that it most definitely is nothing like his Fourth Symphony, which he called simply his symphony in F minor. It's an angry, edgy work with a great deal of violent and desolate music. Listen to this. This is the very end of that symphony, which I first have to find. There's nothing like that at all in the Fifth Symphony. This symphony represents a return to Vaughan Williams' gentler side, a style that was evident in his Pastoral Symphony, Symphony Number 3, and I suppose to the kind of music that might be expected from the composer of The Lark Ascending. Vaughan Williams started work on his Fifth Symphony in 1938 and he finished it in 1943. That makes it, I suppose, a war symphony. And I believe it must have served a purpose when it was premiered by the London Philharmonic Orchestra, with the 70-year-old composer conducting himself. Did so at a prom concert in the Royal Albert Hall on the 23rd of June 1943. It was a time, obviously, when the war was raging, but Vaughan Williams produced a piece of music that remains, I think, life-affirming and contemplative, but ultimately hopeful. And I think as we remain in the grip of the pandemic, I thought this was really appropriate music for these times. There are moments of anxiety in the symphony for sure, but it seems to me to be kind of surrounded by a halo of peace. So let's now hear the opening movement of Vaughan Williams' Symphony Number 5. He called this movement Preludio, a somewhat unusual title for a movement, but here we go. a movement which it seemed to emerge out of a haunting stillness and float in midair, and it didn't seem to end, it seemed to leave us behind somehow. Some folk find this symphony just a bit too pastoral. It's certainly the quietest of Vaughan Williams' 9 symphonies. One critic said of Vaughan Williams' work generally that it all sounds a little too much like a cow looking over a gate. And Aaron Copland famously continued that bovine analogy. He said of this particular work, listening to the 5th Symphony of Raith Vaughan Williams is like staring at a cow for 45 minutes. If that's really the case, well, there's a field near me I'm going to be visiting more often. Vaughan Williams had been working on and off for a number of years on an opera, which was to be based on John Bunyan's The Pilgrim's Progress. He feared that the opera would never be completed, wrongly as it happened, because it was completed in 1952. So he reworked some of the music he'd written for it into this symphony. It wasn't conceived as a war symphony, although it did provide great comfort at a time of all-out war. Neville Cardus, the music critic, wrote that it contained some of the most benedictory and consoling music of our time. The Guardian critic offered a backhanded compliment. They described the symphony as like the work of a distinguished poet who has nothing very new to say, but who can say it in exquisitely flowing music. There can be no doubt that although he started the symphony before the Second World War, the war must have influenced the finished work. The war was something that was very significant to Vaughan Williams. During it, he threw himself into all sorts of voluntary work, such as campaigning on behalf of refugees from Nazi Germany. He was too old to fight during the First World War even, but during that war he did serve with the field ambulance in France, and he saw the horrors of Vimy Ridge, where he evacuated wounded soldiers from the front line. Anyway, let's move on to the second movement. It's a brief and confusing scherzo with swirls of sound that seem to flit from one part of the orchestra to another. At times it's dark and at times it's playful. In an early sketch of this movement, I beg your pardon, he called it the exit of the ghosts of the past, and it certainly does have something that's a bit ghostly about it. I think this movement shows Vaughan Williams to be the great orchestrator that he is, and I actually dedicated this symphony to another great orchestrator, Sibelius. He wrote in the original inscription to the symphony, dedicated without permission, with the sincerest flattery to Jean Sibelius, whose great example of is worthy of imitation. It's thought that Vaughan Williams didn't ask for Sibelius's permission for this, simply because of the war situation at the time. Sibelius listened to a broadcast of the symphony and he wrote to the man who conducted it, Sir Adrian Boult. Quotes, I heard Dr. Raith Vaughan Williams' new symphony from Stockholm under the excellent leadership of Malcolm Sargent. This symphony is a marvellous work. The dedication made me feel proud and grateful. I wonder if Dr. Williams has any idea of the pleasure he's given me. Well, let's play some more of this symphony, and we'll go to the next movement, the second movement. There we go. The rest of this symphony can be heard in the second video, in which I'll tell you a wee bit more about the music and the composer. Before we stop this one, I thought I'd better apologise for that wee electronic bleep you may have heard not long after the start of the first movement. My apologies.